Hey, seventh graders, Mr. Fox here. It's crazy to think that we're in the last week of your seventh grade school year. This is a year that nobody's ever going to forget. It's something that I won't forget. It's something that you won't forget. This year's really brought some difficult challenges. This is one like we've never seen before. But ultimately, we were able to push forward, and that credit goes out to you guys, the students. Without your effort and motivation to get this stuff done, it would have been a lot more difficult to do this flex learning plan. A thank you goes out to Mrs. Geyer and Mrs. Fiegler for their effort and the work that they put into these Google Classrooms, into the recording of this novel study, just to make things as easy as possible during these times for you guys, the students. So a lot of people don't understand the time and the effort that it takes to make these things go as smoothly as they do. So Mrs. Geyer and Mrs. Fiegler did a great job with that. I want to say thank you for a good language arts school year. I wish you nothing but the best in 8th grade. Keep your families happy, healthy, keep them safe. And without further ado, Chapter 11, No Promises in the Wind. Although we had already told the Arthurs goodbye, Mrs. Arthur wanted to see Joey again before we left. So Lonnie took him over that last evening, giving Janie, me, and a chance to talk together out on the back steps while Grandma busied herself inside the kitchen. The stars were thick in the sky that night, and the air was warm and fragrant. The icy winter of Nebraska was far away, its violence something hard to remember. Our thoughts were all about the fact that we would soon be parted. It isn't so fair, you know. I can take a train in Chicago and be back in a few hours, I said. Yes, I know. Janie bent forward, elbows on her knees, chin in her cupped hands. You want me to come back, don't you, Janie? I sure do. And I hope you won't forget me. Of course, as Lonnie says, if other boys ask you to go out with them, naturally you should go. Oh, I will, she said, too readily, I thought. Sometimes I wonder, Janie. I felt her little shoulder grow tense as it leaned against me. She swallowed hard before she spoke. Look, Josh, you could make me cry awful easy, but I'm not going to do it. I dread to see you leave. This place is going to be haunted by you because I think I love you. But I was suddenly edgy and irritated. You just think so? Aren't you sure, Janie? Were you sure when you loved that Emily lady? I took her hand, held it in both of mine while I thought about what she had said. That was not the same, I finally told her. No? And maybe it won't be the same as this when you find some girl who doesn't have freckles and isn't a nut and looks good in earrings. Lonnie's been talking to you, I said. He has not. I wouldn't let him. I've thought these things out for myself because I know things that you and Lonnie don't understand. I happen to be a woman, and I laughed at her. You're only 14, Janie. She choked suddenly and hid her face in her hands. I'm not as sure as I sound, Josh. I don't know what it is all about. I wish I could be sure, but I can't. Not really sure. We sat together for a long time, each of us thinking our own thoughts. When Lonnie and Joey came home, we didn't have much to say to them either. And at 9, when Janie had to go home, I kissed her goodnight right in front of Lonnie. I didn't care. We left for the train to Chicago a little before daylight the next morning. We said goodbye to Grandma before we left the house. Then Joey climbed into the front seat of the car with Lonnie, while Janie and I sat together in the back. We were all silent, and I think the others were as heavy-hearted as I was. Joey and I had tickets for the homeward trip. We had a right to step inside the coach in full view of any train official who chanced to be near. We could sit on the comfortable green mohair seats and have the privilege of feeling the miles slide by without blisters or weariness or pain on our part. Physical pain, that is, for the sight and sounds of a train still sent a shiver of horror through us. But we knew that it was a horror we must overcome. I saw Joey set his shoulders and try to repress the shudder that shook him when he looked at the big wheels of the engine. We stood around feeling stiff and unnatural, dreading the goodbyes, wishing they were over. Lonnie said, Maybe it's just as well you board a little early and get settled. So we moved down the platform to our coach. There, Joey said goodbye to Janie, and we tried to thank Lonnie, but he wouldn't have it. Look, you fellas write to us, write often, and don't forget us, he said. He looked at me with his half smile. You stay and say goodbye to Janie. Joey and I will get on and find a place for your baggage. Janie and I stood in the near darkness together for several minutes. I guess we said the things that most people say when they love one another and a train is waiting to separate them for months, maybe for years, maybe for all time. I hoped she wouldn't cry, and she didn't. Finally I whispered, "Goodbye, Janie," and I left her quickly. Then, at last, Joey and I were in our seats, and after a few minutes the train pulled out slowly as we waved our goodbyes from the window. Neither of us said anything for quite a long time after that. Daylight opened over the prairies within an hour, and we watched the play of colors as they appeared before us. They appeared before us from growing crops, from freshly plowed soil, from woods and streams and blue skies. There wasn't a trace of ice or cold or howling blizzards we had known in the country during the winter. But now and then we saw a tired-looking figure plodding along that may have been a boy my age, hunting the next town to ask for work or a handout. At one spot, a group of men waved a coffee pot at us. They stood beside a fire they had built near the tracks. Sometimes when we stopped at the station, we saw placards reading, "As right as Roosevelt." One of them had been defaced by lines that seemed to slash out the words angrily. On another, someone had written, "Yes, God bless him." We passed a freight occasionally as our passenger train sped down the track. Often there were men standing at the open doors of boxcars, men sitting on top of the cars, their legs dangling over the edge. They might have been the same hopeless-looking men who traveled west with us the night we left Chicago, the hobo who had helped Joey into the car, or the one who gave us a can of beans when we got off somewhere in Nebraska. Once we stopped at a station, we saw a white-coated boy carrying sandwiches and milk and coffee towards the train. "Would you like something to eat?" I asked, and Joey said, "Yes, I'm starving." The words were no sooner out than he looked at me aghast. "What a dumb thing to say," he muttered. It wasn't dumb, but it was strange. He had never once said that when he was, in truth, starving. We ate slowly and comfortably. The coach was not full, and so we removed our shoes and stretched out our stockinged feet to the opposite us. Joey scooted down a little in his seat so that he could make his toes extend as far forward as mine. "You've grown, Joey," I said to him. "In spite of all the things that would stunt most kids, you've been determined to grow." He smiled with satisfaction he smiled with the satisfaction he'd always shown at any praise of mine. The conductor came along and pretended to snip Joey's nose with the ticket punch he carried. "You boys been on vacation?" he asked. We looked at one another. "Well, in a way," I said. The conductor really wasn't much interested. He nodded and walked on. A woman stopped him a few seats forward, and we heard his answer to her question. "We should be getting to Chicago in just about 2 hours, ma'am," he said. I felt a shudder inside me at his words. I wondered if our folks would seem like strangers, if we'd have to get acquainted again, if homesick for Lonnie and Grandma and Janie. Mom would be happy to see us, I could be sure of that, and I could talk to her. I could tell her about playing at the carnival and at the restaurant in Omaha. I could tell her about Janie, and sometime I might just possibly tell her about Emily. And as far as Kitty goes, she'd be interested in everything. I could depend on Kitty. I wondered if I should go to see Howie's mother. Wondered if she'd really care if she heard about what happened. I wondered if she'd really care if she heard about what had happened to Howie. I thought I would go and see Miss Crown, would show her the letter of recommendation from Mr. Erickson that Mr. Erickson had given me. Maybe she'd know of a part-time job. Finally, I had to face what I dreaded. There would be Dad. What would it be like, I wondered? What would we say to one another? I thought about the memory I'd had of him, the memory of him rocking me in front of the fire. I decided I'd tell him about that. Maybe it would help us if he knew that things were blackest. I had remembered a time when we were close to one another. I felt worried and restless. I don't know, Joey. I don't know just how we're going to get along in Chicago. We've had a taste of luck, but times are still bad. Joey wasn't worried. After all we've been through, I guess we can handle Chicago, he said indifferently as he leaned his head against the back of the seat. I couldn't allow the young cock of a walk to see too much of my fear. I guess so, I said, and I managed to smile a little. Soon the shabby old neighborhoods that bordered the railroad tracks began to appear, tired-looking and decrepit, even in the summer sunlight. Buildings huddled together closely, and the smokestacks of factories stood like laborers bare, arms lifted to the sky. Smoke curled from some of them, but others looked cold and dead. The train began to move more slowly, and people all around us bustled about to collect their baggage from the racks above their seats. We won't reach the station for a half an hour or so, the conductor told someone, but people didn't care. They wanted to be ready. They were anxious to climb from that railroad coach and know that the long ride was ended. Joey and I sat quietly. Even my complacent young brother was a little scared now. I could see it in his sudden paleness of his face. Lonnie's kitchen seemed very far away. The happiness and security we'd felt there was very precious. We were coming home, on our own and not a borrowed home. We should have been eager and excited, but we weren't. We were scared. Our train entered the great smoke-stained station at last, slowly, majestically, as incoming trains so often seemed to move. The sunlight could reach the inside of the station only in narrow panels of light here and there, light that was contrasted with the gloom of the long vista which we were entering. Chicago, the conductor shouted at us as the train came to a stop. He warned us not to forget our parcels. Joey looked up at me. I guess they'll meet us, won't they? He asked in a small voice. I think they will, I answered. I felt sick. Slowly we made our way out of the coach. Down the length of the train, people were pouring from a dozen coaches, limping under the weight of their baggage toward the station at the end of the platform. People were standing at the doors of the station, watching for those they had come to meet. Almost immediately, I saw Mom standing there with Kitty at her side. A second later, I saw Dad, only a few feet from us, scanning the crowd that was getting off the coach just ahead of ours. The old impulse to criticize him, to be angry with him, flashed through my mind. Sure, Mom and Kitty must wait in the background. The Lord and Master must be first. Then, shamed as I looked at him, I thought, for heaven's sake, give the poor guy a chance. You're not perfect yourself either, you know. He hadn't spotted us, and we had a chance to see what the winter had done to him as he walked slowly toward us. He had been so big, so strong, and he was now thin and stooped with great hollows in his cheeks. There, in his face, were the lines of his suffering. I couldn't have been callous enough at that moment to feel angry or critical of him as he stood there, his face pleading that Joey and I would be the next to appear at the door of that coach. We walked up to him, and I touched his arm. Hello, Dad. Sure is good to see you again, I said. He gave a start of surprise, and then his face lit up in recognition. With his left arm, he drew Joey to him. With his right hand, he clasped my hand firmly. Hello, son, he said. I'm so glad, so glad. He ducked his head in a little, turning his face away from me as I turned away from Joey the night Lonnie had brought him home. Tears were not in Dad's pattern either. And that is No Promises in the Wind. Thank you.